Hey everybody! So this video lesson is going to cover the sample APA research paper that is here in the week 8 module under Introduction to Research. So hopefully you have already taken a look at the handout on basic APA format guide and watched the video lesson that went along with that handout. Now we're going to take a look at an actual research paper typed up in APA format. We're going to look at some of the most important elements about APA format and just some of the things that I want to make sure you are aware of before the quarter ends and you might have to use APA format in other classes. So the first thing that I want to point out is when you look at the handout, what you need to pay attention to is the gray outline in the middle of the page, like the gray rectangle outline, because that's sort of representing the typed page, not the whole thing that you're seeing on the screen, but just that gray border, like that's the page, if you will. So the first thing I want to look at is the very first page, the title page. So APA format does require a title page. And there are a couple of things that are required to be on the title page. So first thing I want to look at is the header. That is that very top portion of the page. And there is a function in Microsoft Word where you go to the Insert tab and you can insert a header. And what that does is it kind of opens up that little area up there that you normally can't type in, because when you start a Word document, the cursor starts down here a little bit. And that top part, that top margin is left blank. The reason it's left blank is because it's reserved for any type of header that you would like to put in the document. You don't always do that, but that area is still there for that purpose. So in APA format, though, you do want to use the header. So you can do it by going to the Insert tab and inserting a header, and then this little dotted line will appear in that section. That's letting you know it's ready to be typed in. So you can then decide where you want to position the header. Do you want it all the way over to the left-hand side? Do you want it in the middle? Do you want it on the right? Where do you want to position it? For the first part of the header in APA format, you want it on the left side. And what you're going to put there is the title of your essay in all caps. And if you have a really long title to your essay, then you're going to want to do like a shortened version of that title. Most of the time, though, you're going to have a short enough title, you can put the whole thing there. But it's in all caps, and it will be on the left-hand side. All the way over on the right-hand side will be the page number. And the title page does get a page number. It is page number 1. So you can insert page number as well and start with number 1 and make sure that it's positioned over in that right-hand corner. And what that will do, once you have that title in all caps over on the left-hand side of the header and you've done your page number over on the right-hand side, you should not have to type in the page number. All you should do is insert the page number, let it know where you want it positioned, and then it will automatically fill in the numbers for you. Once you have typed everything into that header section, you won't need to type it again on any other page. That's what the header does. Its function is to make sure that whatever you type into that little area up at the top appears on every single page of your document. That way you don't have to go in and do it. Because if you try to go in and do it yourself every time, if you make significant changes to the body of the essay, the paragraphs are going to start moving around, and then all of a sudden the title and the page number are 3/4, or a quarter of the way down the page instead of up at the top. So that's why we use the header section. So that way it's there at the top on every single page of the document. And then everything you type and all the revisions you make will be down in the body of the page, the center of the page, and you won't have to worry about the header needing to be changed. So you want to use the header. Left-hand side is the title of your essay in all caps. Right-hand side is your page numbers. The title page does get numbered as page 1. If you do it in the header the way it's supposed to be done, then you're finished with the header. You don't have to worry about doing that on any other page of the document. It will do it automatically every time you go to a new page. So the next thing about the title page is the title itself, the information that appears almost halfway down that title page. It's a little less than half, but right about half. A lot of people think that a good deal of information is supposed to go in this area, and honestly, it's not much information. Unless your instructor gives you specific requirements for the information that goes on the title page, and then you have to follow what they ask you to do. But otherwise, if they just say it needs to be in APA format and that's all the instruction that they give you, then for APA format, the traditional information for the title page is the title, and then the next line is your name, and then the next line is the school you're attending. And that's it. You don't put anything else. You don't put anything about the class. You don't put the date. You don't put the instructor's name. If they have not asked you to do that, then you go to the default requirements of APA format, and that's just the title, your name, your school. Pretty easy. If you're looking at the sample APA essay that I provided for you, you'll see that at the bottom of the title page is an author's note. You don't have to have this, but if your instructor, asks for something like this, it would be down at the bottom. And if you noticed in this case, this is where they put the information about the specific class and instructor that the paper was written for. But you won't always have to have an author's note. A lot of times the author's note in like a real true APA research paper, the author's note is often used to thank anybody who has helped in the process. Like if you had a grant, to do some sort of research, then you might, give a shout out to the people providing the grant money, things like that. But, for just a typical college class, you won't really need to be thanking anybody for any kind of grants or assistance. So you can have the author's note just provide the information on the course and the instructor if you'd like. But just make sure that what's up in the middle, the main part of the title page is just the title, your name, and the school's name. Pretty easy. So if you scroll down to the next page, you'll see, once again, I want to draw your attention to the header because it's there. The title in all caps on the left-hand side, page number 2 on the right-hand side. And it's just the number. You don't put your last name. You don't put anything else. You don't make the font any different. It's just standard font, either Times New Roman 12-point font, Arial 12-point font, or Calibri 11. The entire essay will be in those fonts. Yes, the title in that header is in all caps, but the font itself is not anything different. It's still 12-point font, Times New Roman. Same thing with the page number, but it automatically populated. They didn't have to retype that information. The second page of an APA paper is supposed to be an abstract. The abstract is basically a summary of the essay, of the research paper. And if you're doing true research, where you are going out and compiling research on your own, or you're gathering research for like a literature review or something like that, you're going to not only say what your original thesis was, but also what methods you used, what kind of sources you used, and what your research revealed, So it's a very technical summary. Not a summary like you would give of a movie or a book. It's a very technical summary of the essay. And it's usually just one paragraph, and that's all that goes on page 2. You'll notice they have abstract centered as the title of this section, page 2. And then there's no extra spaces. The next line immediately starts the abstract. That's one thing that you'll need to pay attention to with APA format is there's never any extra spaces. There's never any special font. Very rarely do you even boldface or underline something. It's almost all in 12-point Times New Roman font or one of the other two acceptable fonts. And there's never any extra spaces. You hit enter one time to go down to the next line, and that's it. You'll also notice that, we didn't do anything special to the title of this section. Abstract is just centered. That's it. It's not underlined. It's not in bold. The font is not bigger. It's not italicized, not in quotation marks, nothing. Just abstract, plain as day, 12-point font. Press enter once, start the abstract. You'll notice that when the abstract is finished, there's a lot of extra space left on that page. That doesn't matter. You still wait until the next page to start the actual paper. So the abstract is dedicated to page 2 and only the abstract. When you get to page 3, you'll see this is where the actual paper begins. We still have our header up there in the top, the very top margin, and then we have the title of the paper centered, but again, nothing else special about it. It's not in bold, it's not underlined, not italicized, not in quotations, not in a bigger font. Very plain, centered. That's the only thing special about it, just that it's centered. You hit enter one time after you have typed the title, and then you go back to having it, go out to the left margin, no longer centered, and you indent, you hit tab, and you start your introductory paragraph. It looks like there's no big announcement. There's nothing special or fancy about APA format. It's actually quite plain in that way. And then you give an introduction just like you would with any other essay. You go every time you switch topics, you start a new paragraph. You may have different sections to your essay. If you do, then you would give each section a title, a heading, and that's the only time you do something special with the font in APA format. So if you go to page 4, you'll see that the first section of this essay is what are the implications of childhood obesity. So that heading is centered and in bold, but still nothing else fancy about it, just centered and in bold. And again, there's no extra spaces. There's no extra space between the introductory paragraph and this heading, and there's no extra space between the heading and the next paragraph. And then you type whatever information goes in that section under that heading. And then when you're finished, you do the next heading and type all of that information. So you'll see here on page 4 that the section on what are the implications of childhood obesity only consisted of 2 paragraphs. And then it goes right into the next section, is medication effective at treating childhood obesity? All right, pretty easy. And, you may not even need to include section headers for your APA paper. If you're ever in doubt, certainly ask the instructor. But a lot of it will just depend on the assignment that you're given and the type of paper that you're being asked to write. So in this case, it made sense to break it down into those sections and, have it kind of detailed like that. So you might be required to do that for future classes. Again, if you're not sure, double check with the instructor. But if they say, yes, you should have sections just like a traditional APA research paper, then you know this is what they're talking about. They get centered, they get bold-faced, that's it. Let's see, what else do you want to draw your attention to? You scroll all the way down to the end of the essay, where the concluding paragraph is. The concluding paragraph starts on page 10 of this paper, and it carries over to the top of page 11. And there's only 3 lines of text on page 11. So there is a lot of extra white space at the bottom of page 11. But still, nothing else gets put on that last page. So if your concluding paragraph only carries over for 1 line of text onto the last page, that's all that goes on that last page. The reference page does not start until the next page. So if you keep scrolling, you have all that white space on page 11, and then page 12 is when the references begin. I want to talk about the references page. So once again, you still have your header up in the top margin. The reference page is still paginated with the whole essay. So the concluding paragraph ended on page 11. The references start on page 12. You'll see that references is centered, but nothing special about it, not underlined, not boldface, not italicized. And then immediately the next line starts the first reference entry. So you got to make sure you bring it back out to the left margin again, because the whole thing doesn't need to be centered, just that title, just the word references. Bring it back out to the left margin and you start your first entry. Now, a lot of people freak out about APA format because of the references page. Everybody thinks that you're supposed to memorize how to create each type of entry for all the different types of sources that are out there. And that is not true. You do not have to memorize how to make a reference entry for a book. You do not have to memorize how to create a reference entry for a journal article. You don't have to memorize it. If you work with it enough, you will eventually start to memorize the format, but it's not required. You don't have to memorize. There are so many ways to create the reference entry without having the format memorized. You can look at a handbook. You can use the function in Word to create a reference entry. You can go to websites on the internet and input the information and it will give you a reference entry. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do this without having to memorize it. All you have to know is what type of source you're using, and you need the information that goes in the reference entry. So you need the author's names, the year of publication, the title of the article, the title of the journal itself, maybe the volume number, maybe the issue number, the page numbers, so you do have to have that information, but you don't have to know exactly how it's ordered. You can find that information elsewhere, and you can use those templates every single time you do an APA paper. You never have to have it memorized. So you have to have the information necessary to create the entry, but use all those other tools that are out there at your disposal to actually create the entry, right? So one thing you need to know about, actually there's several things you need to know about the reference page. It is alphabetized. It is not numbered. It is alphabetized according to the first word of each entry. Typically, the first word of a reference entry is an author's last name, right? But you may be dealing with a source that doesn't have an author, in which case something else is going to come first in the entry, probably the title of whatever the source is. So whatever the first word of that title is, that's what you use to help determine where it goes in the list. It's alphabetized according to the first letter of the entry. It is not numbered. There are no extra spaces in between each entry. How do you know where one entry begins and one entry ends and the next begins? That has to do with what we call a hanging indent, right? And you can have Word do this for you as well, right? But basically, if you think about how we indent a paragraph, right? You're just writing a normal paragraph. The first line of a paragraph gets indented. You hit Tab on the keyboard and start typing. And then you just keep typing until you're finished. After you had gotten through that first line, the computer automatically brings the next line out to the left margin again. And then you just keep going. And then you hit Enter when it's time to start a new paragraph, and you hit Tab again, and it automatically moves over a little bit. It moves over 5 spaces, by the way. That's what a tab is. So a reference entry has the exact opposite. The first line comes all the way out to the left margin, and all the other lines of that entry are tabbed, right? And so that way, you know, the next time you get to a line that comes all the way out to the left margin, that's where the next entry starts. So if you're looking at the example, the sample APA essay, if you're looking at the references there, the very first one, the first word of the first entry was an author's last name, Berkowitz. And that word Berkowitz is all the way out to the left margin. And then they keep typing, and all the other lines for that entry are tabbed over. So Berkowitz hangs out a little bit more, and all the other lines for that entry are indented. And then you get to Carmona, which comes all the way out to the left side. And you know, oh, okay, now we're at the next entry. The author's last name was Carmona. So then we type in the rest of that entry. So that's how your eye is able to distinguish where each entry begins. When you find something that comes all the way back out to the left margin, that's the start of the next entry. So make sure that you have it alphabetized according to the first word of the entry, that you are using the hanging indent, and that there are no extra spaces between the entries. As soon as, you know, with that first entry with Berkowitz, you know, they got down to the end and they gave us the page numbers, you know, 1805 through 1812, period. They just hit enter once and started the next entry. No extra spaces. The reference page is double spaced, just like the rest of the essay. So APA format is definitely double spaced. All formats are double spaced. It's just easier on the eyes. When you have everything squished together and it's single spaced, it's really difficult to keep your place while you're reading. So that's why things are double spaced. So APA is double spaced in one of the 3 acceptable fonts, reference page included in that, right? Double spaced, no extra spaces, in a regular font, not numbered, but alphabetized with a hanging indent, okay? As for the entries themselves, like I said, you don't have to worry about memorizing any of that. Just make sure you have all the information that's necessary to create the entry, and then use another tool to help you create it. Word is a good function. Word has a pretty good function to help you create the reference entries. And what's cool about that is once you create the reference entry, you can then use the function to help you create citations in the body of the paper. So I always tell students, it might seem strange because the references come at the very end of the essay, but you actually want to create it first, after the title page. Create the title page in your header, and then create a reference page. Doesn't matter. You can go however many pages out you want, or you can start it on page 4, because once you go to page 3 and start your opening paragraph, it will keep adding and it will keep moving that reference page to the very end of the document. So I always tell students, create the reference page first, because once you have it, then it will help you create the citations in the body of the paper. And here's the rule. I think I mentioned this in the other video, but remember, anytime you use information from a source, you have to give credit to that source in the essay. Whether you have paraphrased something and put it in your own words, whether you have summarized a whole big thing, a whole big paper, or a whole big book, if you've used direct quotes, word for word, and even put it in quotation marks, you still have to give the internal citation, which is the part that goes in parentheses in the paragraph. So a lot of students don't know what's supposed to go in the parentheses. If you have already created your reference page, Word will do it for you. You just have to let it know which source has been used in that citation, and it will fill it in. But it's pretty easy. Like I said in the other video, it's just the first word of the entry and the year of publication. That's all that goes in those parentheses. But remember too that they have to match up. So anything that gets a citation in the body of the essay, there has to be an entry for it on the references page. any source that's listed on the references page has to be cited at least once in the body of the essay. So what might happen is you may have these 6 sources that you're pretty sure you're going to use. So you make a reference page in Word for all 6 of those sources. But as you're writing the essay and revising the essay, it turns out you only end up citing 5 of them in the essay. Then you just go to the reference page and delete the 6th one that you never ended up using, right? But it's good to go ahead and have it there from the beginning, so that way you make your job easier when it comes to citing them in the body of the paper. So if you go back and look at the body of this sample essay, you can see all the times that they have cited a source. So page 9, for example, we start the section, is medication the best solution? And they have a little introductory paragraph to this section. And then in the next paragraph, it says, in purely financial terms, the drugs cost more than $3 a day on average. And then in parentheses, you see Duenwald, 2004. If we scroll back to the references entry, we can look alphabetical order, B, Berkowitz, C, Carmona, C, Krister, D, Duenwald. We can see the whole entry there if we want to go read that source for ourselves. And it would appear as though that information that they used there on page 9 about the cost of the drug being $3 a day, they did not do a direct quote there. There's nothing in quotation marks. So they did not take that information word for word from their source. They paraphrased it. They put it in their own words. But they still had to give credit because that information came from somewhere else. Let's see here. See if I can give you an example of another kind. Okay, if you look on page 10, very top of page 10, a handbook designed to educate doctors on obesity called for, quote, major changes in some aspects of Western culture, quote. And then we have in parentheses, Hoppin and Traveris, 2004, conclusion section, paragraph 1. That's a long citation because they wanted to direct us to the exact location where that quote came from. And it was in quotation marks, so we know that they took that word for word from that source. So no matter how you present the information that you got from a source, doesn't matter how it's presented, it has to be cited. And I always tell students when if you're doing this in Word and you've created that reference entry, every time you use information from a source, if you use the function in Word to create the citation, it should do it correctly for you every time. But even if you're not using that function, when you get to a place where you have used source information, something that you've gotten from one of your sources, if you don't remember off the top of your head what to put in the parentheses, just put something in parentheses and then highlight it or underline it or something to draw your attention back there when you review the essay. Be like, oh yeah, I forgot I need to plug in my citation. You don't have to get it perfect the first time you write it. But what you don't want to do is forget that information came from another source and forget to give the citation, because then you run the risk of plagiarizing, and that can cost you a grade on the whole thing. It could cost you your grade in the class overall. So even if you don't cite it 100% correct as you're writing the essay, as you're drafting, do something to draw attention to that section so that later you can go back and create the correct citation. Like I said, if you're using the functions in Word and you've already created your references, then that part can be pretty easy for you. So those are some of the highlights that I wanted to hit with the sample APA essay. The title page, including the header, the abstract, how you start the essay, the fact that it's, it is double spaced. It is in one of those 3 acceptable fonts, but there's no extra spaces. There's never any special font. The most you might do is center something and maybe boldface it if it's a section heading. I wanted you to look at the references so that you see how the reference page is formatted. Those are what you need to pay attention to, are those little formatting things. References centered in the middle, and then every entry is alphabetized, hanging indent, no extra spaces, not numbered. The entries themselves, you do not have to memorize the format. There are plenty of ways out there to create a correctly formatted APA reference entry. You're actually going to be working on that in week 8, assignment 1. So you're not doing a research paper, but I am going to have you create a reference page just so you can get the hang of it. And then maybe the next time you are asked to do a research paper in APA format, you'll be able to do the reference page with a little more confidence and a little less stress. But once you have the reference page, then creating the citations in the essay will be even easier, right? If you have any questions or comments about this particular handout, this sample APA essay, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, you can go ahead and take a look at the PowerPoint that comes next, which is a very brief PowerPoint, and the video lesson that goes along with that.